Hey there, my name is Christian. My idea of a perfect day is fishing on a trout stream in southeast Minnesota. Being outdoors makes me feel good, and I know I'm lucky I had mentors to teach me how to fish and to show me where I can access fishing waters. Did you know there are more than 1,000 places you can explore nature in Minnesota? There are parks, trails, wildlife refuges, and other nature spaces known as public lands in every county of Minnesota. These places are paid for and maintained through taxpayer dollars. They're like your own personal big backyard. Today we'll follow some youth from southeast Minnesota as they explore different public lands and discover some of the fascinating stories and hidden histories at these sites. Let's get exploring. Whitewater State Park is one of the 75 state parks in Minnesota. It has some awesome trails that take visitors up the bluffs for amazing views of the Whitewater River Valley. The Dakota Indians named this river Miniska, meaning whitewater, because long ago the spring snowmelt washed clay deposits into the river, turning the water milky white. The park was established in 1919 and later developed by the National Park Service as part of the New Deal programs of the Great Depression. Crews of young men ages 18 to 25 enlisted in the Civilian Conservation Corps, known as the CCC, and worked with hand tools and muscle to build much of the infrastructure we still use at Whitewater today. Unfortunately, segregation was rampant in the CCC program and made it hard for young men of color to serve at Whitewater State Park. Today, visitors come for the scenic trails, trout fishing, camping, picnicking, swimming, and to participate in the year-round naturalist programs such as snowshoeing, bird watching, maple syrup making, and caving field trips.
Hey there, my name is Rose. I'm excited to share with you what students at Riverway Learning Community learned while exploring our local public lands. Their first trip was to Whitewater State Park. A team of students researched the site ahead of the field trip and shared about the CCC with their fellow classmates. They learned that many of the trails, parking lots, beach, and picnic areas were built by CCC boys. They also learned that, although this program provided much-needed work to millions of young men, segregation policies created barriers for boys of color to participate. In Minnesota, boys of color were either sent to segregated camps or they lived in mixed camps with segregated barracks. They faced discrimination from local citizens and from some camp supervisors, and eventually were transferred out of Minnesota. The Twin Cities Urban League, along with black and white activists from across the Twin Cities, took action. They launched a campaign to expose the discrimination, and they successfully lobbied legislators to bring the boys home and to end segregation in Minnesota CCC camps. The legacy of the CCC, preserved in the roads, trails, and historic stone and log buildings of our state and national parks, is as equally inspiring as the fight for equal opportunity and the advancement of civil rights in Minnesota that resulted from the unfair policies of the CCC. After learning some of the history of Whitewater State Park, students tried different outdoor activities including snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, and campfire cooking. They visited the park in February, and even though it was winter and cold, they made some great memories.
Okay guys, we're going on our own adventure, and yeah, it's really pretty. Look at the view, it's amazing. Yeah, there's the water over there. Can't really see it, but the water's over there. Then we're walking on the little bridge.
We've jumped over to the Snake Creek unit of the Richard J. Dorr Memorial Hardwood State Forest, a few miles northeast of Whitewater State Park. Prior to the Civil War, southern plantation owners vacationed in places like Reed's Landing, Frontenac, and St. Paul, often with their enslaved servants. Stories abound of abolitionist steamboat captains with deep connections to the Underground Railroad. It is believed there were several UGRR routes in southeast Minnesota, including the Snake Creek Valley and other locations within the Richard J. Dorr State Forest. Today, these forests are primarily managed for timber resources, but there are a number of popular recreation activities you can enjoy at state forest lands, including hunting, camping, foraging, hiking, wildlife viewing, and some sites allow ATV use, horse riding, and mountain biking.
The next trip was to Snake Creek Forest Unit, where students explored local stories and legends of Underground Railroad sites in southeast Minnesota. The National Park Service Network to Freedom project has identified Underground Railroad sites throughout the Midwest, mapping out routes freedom seekers followed on their journeys to freedom. The Network to Freedom map continues to grow as more and more sites submit documentation and evidence of their connections to the Underground Railroad. In recent years, sites in Wisconsin, Iowa, and the Dakotas have been added to the map. We know freedom seekers did not stop at Iowa when their destination was Canada. They had to come through Minnesota. But how? An 1895 article from the St. Paul Pioneer Press highlights an interview with Joseph Farr, a black man and former cabin boy on the Dr. Franklin steamboat. Farr recalled his experiences assisting freedom seekers hidden aboard, and the network of volunteers at St. Paul who ushered freedom seekers toward Canada. Many of the earliest American settlers were from the East Coast, descendants of the Pilgrims and Revolutionary War families. Among these were white, black, and multiracial families with abolitionist views. Some were involved in the Underground Railroad prior to coming to Minnesota. Some were civil rights leaders and involved themselves with local politics to ensure slavery would not be permitted in Minnesota. Steamboats were the main form of transportation in the region at this time, and some steamboat captains were radical abolitionists and Underground Railroad conductors. Many black laborers were employed on steamboats, which stopped frequently to load and unload passengers and freight. It is very possible steamboats were moving freedom seekers up the Mississippi River, unloading them here and there at stops from Brownsville to St. Paul. I've watched barges and boats go up the Mississippi River, but before learning about the Underground Railroad, I never thought about the river as a gateway to freedom. In addition to learning about the Underground Railroad in this area, students tried fat tire biking, bird watching, and digital photography at this site. Only a few miles from Winona, and yet most of the students didn't know this place was here before their field trip. Several students said they would definitely be back to explore more.
So what is your name?
My name is Kylos.
And how old are you?
I am 15.
So tell us where we are today.
We are at Snakewood Park, Memorial Park? Next Snake Creek, yes.
And what activity did you do today?
I did the bird watching today.
How was that?
That was really fun. We got to go around through these woods and search for various different Minnesota birds that we could find out in our backyard.
I went on a nature scavenger hunt through the forest. We saw some really cute tracks, and yeah, it was just very nice to hang out with people.
So what was the scavenger hunt? What was that about?
We basically had to look around and take pictures of things that we found on the list, like animal tracks, ice, the water, animals that we found. We found a wasp nest. So yeah, we just took pictures and checked stuff off the list.
So what are you going to take away from this field trip this month?
I mainly am just going to walk away with just appreciating the beauty of where I live. I love living here and I love the area.
The Rails to Trails program of the 1980s provided money to transform former railroad beds into first-class bike trails. Today, Minnesota boasts more than 20 state bike trails and over 30 state water trails and is recognized as an outstanding trails state. Many cities and counties have also developed local and regional trail systems. I wonder how often the folks biking the trails think about the laborers who built these railroad beds. These early railroads were typically built by enslaved people or poor immigrants. Many railroad laborers died from preventable disease spread through poor living conditions or from injuries sustained on the job. Today, we use these routes to enjoy biking, skating, scootering, snowshoeing, and cross-country skiing.
When we think of American railroads, we might think of adventure, travel, and the western frontier. But during our visit to the Root River State Trail, we learned about the laborers who were exposed to long hours, low wages, and hard, dangerous work building the railroads. They were often people from marginalized and displaced populations. Railroad companies relied on the labor of tens of thousands of immigrant and migrant workers. In Minnesota, many Scandinavian, German, and Irish immigrants were recruited to help build the railroads. Once railroads were in place, African Americans served in numerous capacities, as firemen shoveling coal into engines, as brakemen and switchmen, baggage and freight handlers, and as porters and waiters. Porter jobs were designated exclusively for black men. Working over 400 hours per month, porters carried baggage, shined shoes, cleaned the sleeping cars, and responded courteously to passenger requests. They were allowed 3 hours of sleep the first night and none the remainder of the trip, and the company charged them for their food, uniforms, and even the polish they used on passengers' shoes. Influential African American leaders in Minnesota helped organize and mobilize the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first African American labor union in the U.S., and helped kickstart the civil rights movement. They were eventually able to negotiate better work hours, pay, and benefits for all porters. There are many stories along these former railroad routes that must not be forgotten. Stories of people whose lands were stolen, whose bodies and spirits were nearly broken, and who, despite much adversity, blazed a better future for their descendants and for us all. These are trails of resilience, resistance, and progress. Students had the opportunity to explore the Root River Trail by bike, skateboard, rollerblades, and by foot. It was great to hit the trail with friends and explore a new place students had not seen before.
Now we've hopped over to the Upper Mississippi River National Wildlife Refuge in Wabasha County, one of 13 national refuges in Minnesota. This refuge runs from Wabasha down to Rock Island, Illinois, and with 3.7 million annual visitors, it's the busiest wildlife refuge in the nation. This place holds fascinating human history spanning thousands of years. This area was once part of the 320,000-acre Dakota Half-Breed Reservation, established by the U.S. government in 1832. There were once hundreds of burial mounds in the area. Unfortunately, many were plowed under by settlers. Local place names such as Red Wing, Wakuta, Wabasha, and Winona remind us of the original residents of this land. Wildlife refuges are maintained to provide breeding habitat and migratory corridors for wildlife. Visitors to this National Wildlife Refuge enjoy water recreation including boating, backwaters, canoeing, and kayaking, fishing, waterfowl hunting, fur trapping, and limited camping on some of the islands in the river. During winter, ice fishing, skating, cross-country skiing, and eagle watching are popular activities.
During their visit to the Upper Mississippi River National Wildlife Refuge near Wabasha, students learned about the Dakota Half-Breed Reservation, designated in the 1830 Treaty of Prairie du Chien. A local naturalist shared about the natural history of this area and how bison and elk once roamed the prairie and oak savannas, and the now extinct passenger pigeons once roosted by the millions in the trees along the riverbanks. Students discussed how the relationship between humans and the land has changed over the generations, and they observed that, in many ways, how people treat one another often reflects how they treat the land too. Learning about what happened in this area as Dakota families were displaced by American settlers while others found their fortunes on this river, and by farming wheat where prairie once flourished, was eye-opening for students. They talked about ways to show gratitude to the land and the waters and nurture relationship with all living things. The beauty and abundance of nature at this National Wildlife Refuge is incredible. There are so many public access sites where you can get out on the Mississippi River to explore.
We end our journey at Unity Park on the shore of Lake Winona. This site is one of the thousands of city parks across Minnesota and was established to build relationship, understanding, and healing, especially those who carry historical trauma from events like the U.S.-Dakota War of 1862 and the forced removal of the Dakota people from the state of Minnesota. Our public lands provide everyone with access to nature and to the health and wellness benefits associated with outdoor recreation. And these sites are great places to literally walk into the footsteps of those who came before.
At Unity Park, a teacher from Riverway School shared her Indigenous perspectives on nature and why it is important to have relationships with the natural world. Students shared about their favorite nature spaces and how being in nature helps them feel calm and relaxed. The human history at this location goes back many generations, long before American settlers came to Minnesota. And the human struggles for freedom, equality, and happiness that existed 200 years ago still exist today for many people. Even though these field trips focused on public lands and nature exploration, each site the students visited held stories of civil rights efforts and the struggles for freedom and equality that many different people from many different backgrounds have experienced over the generations. This park provided an opportunity for quiet self-reflection, time to sit and think of the land and the stories it holds.
Stories like those we explore today abound at our public lands. The state forest lands and wildlife refuges around our country hold important stories. I encourage you to become a legend hunter, to explore your public lands and seek out the stories of the places where you live. My story is going to be about catching that whopper brown trout that keeps eluding me. I hope to see you out on the trails.
If I was trying to convince some of my friends to come outside with me, I would probably tell them that it's good exercise, but it's something that's also really fun to do.
What's your favorite nature space to visit and why?
I'd have to say Carly State Park, just because it brings me back to my childhood when I would go with my dad.
My favorite outdoor activity would probably be swimming and actually recently hiking.
What barriers or fears might discourage you from going outside?
Well, I have to say, with the Project Get Outdoors program, I had a lot of fears of like bugs and different plants and objects that, you know, you shouldn't touch outside. But with the program that it started several years ago, I learned from our dear friend Sarah that you shouldn't touch those things. But now with that program, I'm good to go.